Okay, we got to an interesting lecture. Comments. Are comments code smells? Well, in most cases, they are. Let's go through some examples of comments that are code smells. Comments that state the obvious. Look at this method. Get customers, which returns a list of customers. This comment is telling me returns the list of customers. So what is the value of this comment? Absolutely nothing. The method itself is pretty clear enough that we don't need that comment there. A comment like that just creates noise in the code. Here is another comment of this type. So we're creating a new SQL connection, and that's pretty obvious in the code. Yet the comment is telling me, create a new connection to the database. Why do we need something like that? We don't really. Here is another one. Just look at the code before reading the two-line comment. The code says, if overdue days is less than 5, notify the customer, otherwise issue a fine. This code itself is so self-explanatory, and we don't need that 2 lines of comment there. It's just stating the obvious. Plus, the problem with this kind of comment is not all developers keep these comments up to date. We change some logic somewhere, but we do not necessarily update the comments. So these comments, after a while, get outdated, and they reveal the wrong information, which is the worst thing we can do to our code base. We don't want comments that tell lie. The ultimate comment for our source code should be the code itself. The code should be so clean and so self-explanatory that it does not need any comments. Let's take a look at another category of useless comments. Version history. I have seen comments like that a lot. And often it's not as simple as what you see in this slide. In code bases where they comment every feature and the version it was added or it was removed, you see lots of instances of comments all over the place. Just imagine for a second if someone joins that team or wants to maintain that application 3 years down the track. Does he or she really care about every single thing that happened over various versions of that application? Probably not. So please do not write comments like that. They're completely useless. Here's another example of version history comments. So you open a file and the first page on your screen is just comments. The dates, the name of people who made changes, and the type of change they made. So essentially you have to scroll down until you see the actual code. Again, this is completely useless. These days we use version control systems. If someone is interested to see who made what change when, they can always look at the log or history of the repository. Here is another category of useless comments. So they are there to clarify the code. In this example, when I look at this variable pf, I have no idea what it means. That's why we have a comment next to it, pay frequency. Well, couldn't we just name that variable pay frequency? This way we wouldn't need that comment. So that comment is a smell. And here's another category of comments. Dead code. Why would you even comment out some code? Just delete it. If you don't need it, just delete it. You can always pull it back from your source code repository. Okay, now let's open up Visual Studio and see how we can clean up a code that has some useless comments. You can find this example in the Solution Explorer under Comments folder. So let's see what's happening here. The first thing that got my attention is this PF, or pay frequency. When you see a comment like that, immediately remove it. And the next thing, use rename refactoring to describe your code properly. So F2, and I just renamed that to pay frequency. Much better. Here's the example that you saw in the slides. This comment is telling me the obvious. We don't need it. In fact, I have seen worse comments, something like this. This creates even more noise in the code. Now, sometimes you may need this kind of comments perhaps because there is another tool that gets them and compiles them into some kind of HTML document. That's a separate story. But if you're not working on a framework or a public API, you don't really need to pollute your source code with lots of noisy comments that don't add any value. So here we select this comment quickly with Ctrl W and delete it. Now look at this comment. This is an example of a good comment. So it's a to-do comment. Sometimes we are working on some piece of code and we see a problem. So we don't want to get distracted and change our focus. So we just leave a comment there as a to-do comment, and later when we get back to that part of code, we can see what was happening before and fix that problem. Plus, when we write a to-do comment like that, we can always find them in a to-do list. And that is here under View, Task List, and here in this drop-down list, we select Comments. So any comment that we write that starts with to-do, and there should not be a space. So / and to-do. We can always see them in a list. Okay, let's see what this comment is telling us. It's saying we need to get rid of ABCD once we revisit this method. Currently, it's creating a coupling between X and Y, and because of that, we are not able to do X, Y, Z. I wrote this comment, I just made it up. What I'm trying to tell you here is, if you see problems in the code, it's perfectly fine to write comments about them. Another kind of good comment is when you're solving a problem, but there are some constraints. Maybe because of some legacy reasons, maybe there is a problem in your database, maybe you're using a third-party component that has some problems. These kind of constraints are great to document in your code. So if you had a reason for doing something in a certain way, always write a comment about it. So next time someone else looking at that code and they think that code is weird and they start to refactor it, they know that maybe they shouldn't do it because there are some constraints around that piece of code, so it cannot be easily changed. So in short, write comments to explain whys and hows, not whats. The code itself should be so self-descriptive that does not need a comment to explain what it's doing. Now let's take a look at another more interesting comment. So we've got this method here, submit order, and here we have two blocks of code that are separated by a vertical space here. When you see comments like that, that's often an opportunity to do some refactoring, not just remove the comment. This method is doing two things. One is saving the order in the database. Another one is sending an email to the customer. So what I'm going to do is, instead of having that comment there, I'm going to select this piece of code with Ctrl W and then Ctrl Shift R, extract method. I'm going to give it a proper name. So send email to customer, or we can even come up with a shorter name like notify customer. There you go. So this comment is no longer needed. And our code is more self-explanatory. We can do the same thing here. So I'm going to select these two lines. Extract method, save order. And now we get rid of this comment. Note that our submit order method is kind of telling a story. Save order, notify customer. And if you're interested in details of any of these methods, we can just go there with Ctrl B and see what happens during notifying a customer. And also note that as a result of this refactoring, our submit order method is even shorter. Now in this example, it wasn't terribly bad, but sometimes your methods can grow pretty large, like 50 lines, 100 lines, 200 lines. And you may see parts that are really related to each other and they're separated by some kind of comment. You can immediately extract them into a separate method. Uncle Bob has a great line in his book, "Don't write comments, rewrite your code." And I can't agree more. Whenever you are trying to write comment, that means you failed to explain your code, which means the code is so complex. Now we can apply various techniques to make that code simpler. You may rename a few variables or methods or properties here and there. You may break down a method into smaller methods. There is always a way. So next time you're trying to write a comment, see if there is a way to rewrite your code so it doesn't need a comment. And if you're desperate to write a comment, make sure to explain whys and hows, not whats. Whats should be obvious in the code itself. In the next lecture, we'll take a look at long methods. I hope you enjoyed this lecture and thank you for watching.